Isaiah chapter 58. Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, and to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet day after day they seek me, and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness, and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. Why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble ourselves, but you do not notice? Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day, and oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight, and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, to bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. And Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Mental health is a topic that we have heard more about in the last couple of years, and is probably something that we've heard more about in the United Kingdom as we've tried to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Depression, mental health issues, the level of suicides, our encounters with people who suffer because of these things may well increase as we begin to come out of lockdown. How do you and I cope with life, maintain our own spiritual, emotional, psychological, and physical and mental well-being? Matthew's Gospel states, You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. How do these verses speak to the topic of depression? In William Barclay's commentary on this passage from Matthew, he says, Robert Louis Stevenson once entered in his diary as if he was recording an extraordinary phenomenon. I have been to church today and am not depressed. That immediately reminds me of something else that I had read in a book entitled The Education of Desire by Timothy Gorringe. He writes, Going to church these days can often be a depressing experience. Occasionally one encounters congregations which have been galvanized into life, but more often they seem to be in a persistent vegetative state. Now that quite sounds like being salt and light, does it? It seems to reflect a picture of the church that's probably held by most people, a lot of people in the society around us. That church is a boring place. Church is stiff and starchy. Church is a place where nothing ever changes, where they don't keep up with the times, where they fail to listen to the discoveries that we find within the world? How do we respond to those kinds of challenges and those kind of questions? How do we actually be the kind of people in society that others look at and say that these people are the salt and light of the local community? These people are the ones who are making a difference, who are making changes that are helping our society rather than hindering it. These people are the ones that are helping those who are trying to cope with depression, with mental health issues, risking taking their own lives. Is there something that we need to look at to begin with about how we worship God, when we worship God, where we worship God? Perhaps how we come together, hopefully when we're able to again shortly on a Sunday or at other times. And do we need to consider whether what we're doing is boring and needs to change, or whether what we're doing and saying in our worship is something that we think is important in terms of our faith and in terms of what we're saying about God and about ourselves? And how do we determine which is which? Our worship and how we worship has had to change over these past few weeks. How have you coped with that? How have you felt about that? Are you longing for a return to normal? What is normal? And what place does worship play in the lives we lead outside of our church buildings? Is being salt and light in the world today as Christians all to do with how we worship? Or is there something more, something deeper that we need to think about? Was Jesus simply talking about people who worshipped in the right way, who knew what to do in church settings, or what? It's here that our reading today from Isaiah helps us. It's here that we begin to see a picture of a people who did do the right things in terms of their religious practices. In today's language, they went to church every Sunday, they prayed regularly, they gave to the church regularly, they read their Bibles, and what's more, they actually fasted as well. Help. But God could see through their hearts. God could see through the unreality that was in their lives. God knew that actually all that they were doing was following rules that they had followed that were made up by others. All that they were doing was trying to do things that they thought would please God, but without actually coming to God and asking God what it was that God wanted them to do. And God's reply to them, God's spoken word to them at such a time, was a stinging rebuke. Is this the kind of fast I've chosen? Only a day for someone to humble themselves? Their focus was on the wrong thing, the wrong items. They were looking for praise from the wrong places and trying to do what they thought was right without discussing what was actually happening, what was actually needed with God. God wanted them to do exactly what God still wants us to do as God's people. To loose the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. How do we do that? Where do we start? Although Tim Gorringe, who I quoted earlier, gets depressed in some churches, he cites an example of a church that has changed direction. And rather than stay where it decided to make an effort to change. The first step is action, Gorringe writes. And in his example, the church that he talks about decided to take risks. They decided to get involved in AIDS, to welcome the homosexual community and people with AIDS into its ranks. And Gorringe suggests in his book that if we have a church which is in a persistent vegetative state, we hope none of ours are, then he suggests we may need to begin to get involved with something, an issue that is around us. It may be AIDS, it may be asylum seekers, it may be nuclear weapons, it may be the homeless or other marginalised groups. It may be the global economy. It's interesting to note that another author seeking to provoke the church into engaging with society today also speaks in a similar way in terms of what we need to do. Steve Chalk writes, "My job is simply to love God and love other people, and through that commitment reflect God's love to them." A page or so later in Steve Chalk's book, he then quotes Leslie Newbigin. "We do not seek to impose our Christian beliefs upon others. But this is not because, as in the liberal view, we recognize that they may be right and we may be wrong. It's because the Christian faith itself, centered in the message of the incarnation, cross and resurrection, forbids the use of any kind of coercive pressures upon others to conform." Both writers are trying to say that we offer people love first and foremost. We give them ourselves before we even consider giving them anything else. Chalk writes, "An intelligent approach to transforming mission will always start and end with love for its own sake." So where and how can we be salt and light into the world around us that world needs? What are the issues facing our places of worship, our community, our church? I began by talking about mental health issues, depression and suicide. Is this an area of need, of support in our communities? If it is, how do we respond to that need? Is being involved part of being salt and light? Or should we simply keep ourselves to ourselves and not venture out, not get involved, leave this work, this support to others? What is my vision? What is our vision? What do I see as being the ideal? I'd like to see a church where the barriers are broken down, barriers between different classes of people, between people who have much wealth and people who have little wealth, barriers between different races, between different aged people. I'd like to see a church where we do not talk about young people, old people, middle-aged people, single people, married people. I'd like to see a church where we're able to come together as one, where the young people and the old people can mess around together, knowing that they are loved and cared for and part of one very special family, the Christian family, the people of God, a holy and healthy family. I'd like to see a place where the lonely find themselves part of that family, a place where those who have mental health issues, those who are depressed, those who feel suicidal can feel welcomed and at home and at rest and at ease. A place perhaps where our worship is a strange mixture of things we love and things we hate, perhaps. But they contain things that we put up with because we know that other people love that kind of worship. And we love them. So we'll share in worshipping in different ways with them, even though we might not like it as much. But because we love the people that we worship with. Being salt and light means that we change things. We transform everything that we encounter. If the church, if our churches stop changing things, then they may no longer be salt and light, and may no longer be of any use to God. I don't want to be part of a church that isn't changing things, not for change's sake, but for the better. I hope that's the kind of church that you want to be part of too. One that makes a difference to the lives of the people that live around us. The people that we know need to hear the news, the good news of God's love for them. May God's peace be with you this day and evermore. Amen.